Denver Broncos running back position didn't get the production that they needed in Sean Payton's offense. How might that change in 2024? And could the room look entirely different? We'll take a look at that in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
After a rough season in 2023, can Broncos running back Javonte Williams bounce back here this upcoming season? It's one of the things we'll throw out on today's brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, and all you everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get this podcast daily, every single day, all year long, for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. We'll provide coverage on every side of the coin here on the show. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, as we continue our position review series, yesterday's episode, we took a look at the quarterback position and all the questions facing that, the production, and everything in review. Now we focus on the running back position, which for a Broncos offense, when Sean Payton came in, we had talked about it, and Sean had said so much of what they want to do is to be able to run the football. Well, Denver couldn't do it effectively enough or consistently enough in 2023. There were times where things were going on where they were able to have success. And Denver, when they were able to rush for over 140 yards a game, collectively, they were finding ways to win. But that didn't come as consistent as it should have been. And it honestly looked like for Denver, running the football was hard for them to do. It was hard for them to get 2 or 3 yards a pop.
Yeah, it really was. And I think that kind of came as a result of not having much balance offensively throughout the season. I mean, I know there's a lot of debate about the quarterback position and Russell Wilson and how well he played, but the Broncos were one of the worst teams in the NFL in terms of passing efficiency this past season. And that definitely plays into the success of the running game. I mean, teams load up the box. They were more aggressive against the Broncos in terms of blitzing, whether run blitz or against the pass. And it just didn't result in anything that we really were hoping for. I think you kind of hope the Broncos could build this toughness, this identity offensively that, hey, no matter what, every single week, we're going to smack you in the mouth and we're going to be able to run the ball effectively, if nothing else. But that wasn't really the case, was it? I mean, they ranked 18th in the NFL in total rushing yards, 21st in yards per attempt. They were one of the worst in the NFL in rushing touchdowns. I mean, Cody, the trio of Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, they combined for just 5 rushing touchdowns all year. And that's kind of crazy considering the volume of touches they received.
Well, if I'm not mistaken as well, I'm trying to remember at what point of the season Denver got their second rushing touchdown of the year. And I can't remember. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, was it against Kansas City and when Denver beat them, or was it a different game? I mean, I can't remember. It was at the midway point of the year where it's like Denver has their second rushing touchdown of the season. It was a home game. I know that. And we're like, wow, like the first one came from Jaleel in week 2 against the Washington Commanders on that toss play. It was beautiful. He went untouched. But the fact that Denver couldn't have production from a rushing touchdown standpoint, from a rushing standpoint, spoke volumes, I think, about some of the limitations that the offense ultimately ran into. And look, while the conversation has been on, what Russell Wilson did or didn't do, what Sean Payton did or didn't do, I think overall Denver's offense, and you and I, we talked about this almost ad nauseum on the show throughout the season, is that they just simply were one-dimensional. And part of that was because they couldn't run the ball effectively. Now, we have seen the formula. When they were able to run for over 100-plus yards in a game, like their chances of winning were drastically amplified. But we didn't see those situations where, like Sayre, it felt like on a 2nd and 3, Denver couldn't pick up a first down. Like that's where it was a little frustrating here. And overall, I think we saw just the balance change. Look, Javonte early on in the season, I believe it was against Chicago, suffered that quad injury. And obviously that impacted him a little bit. And so you relied on Jaleel, who was obviously having a lot of success. But we saw just a change in the dynamic of how the Broncos offense was utilizing these guys. They went from Javonte and Jaleel early on, and we thought it was going to be Javonte and Samaje early on as the 1-2 punch. And then it switched from Javonte and Samaje to Javonte and Jaleel and to Javonte and Samaje. And then toward the end of the season, you started to see Samaje kind of being phased out a little bit, and you saw a little bit more of Jaleel McLaughlin. And so for me, it didn't seem like Denver had an idea, or they didn't have like flow or rhythm to it. And I think they were just trying to go with, okay, who's the hot hand? I think we can all agree that Samaje was very reliable for Denver out of the backfield as a pass catcher this season. But overall, like when your offense is limited the way that Denver's was this year, and majority of the touches came from your running backs, that speaks to a bigger problem overall for the Broncos. And look, we did an episode, a week or so ago about three of the biggest questions facing Sean Payton and how he can improve the offense. Denver's going to have to come up with a plan here, how to make sure that the run game isn't so one-dimensional or unbalanced, which I don't know what their plan is. I don't know how they're going to do it, but that's definitely a huge issue when your running backs are getting the most of your production and you have talented playmakers on the outside that simply, outside of Cortland Sutton, aren't getting the ball.
Yeah, and just to paint that picture, right? I mean, 373 total touches between the backs in 2023. These guys ranked 1, 2, 3 on the team in touches this season, meaning Javonte Williams at 264, Jaleel McLaughlin at 107, and Samaje Perine at 103. Any successful offense in the NFL, Cody, I mean, you go top to bottom. I don't think you're going to find any team that is good in the NFL that has 3 running backs atop their total touches list. And then from scrimmage, I mean, you're right. You're talking about over 2,200 yards from scrimmage, almost 2,300 yards from scrimmage. And these guys being 3rd and 4th and 5th on the team in targets in the passing game. I mean, from Samaje Perine to Javonte Williams to Jaleel McLaughlin, 3, 4, 5 on the team in total targets. So that paints the picture of how involved these guys were, but it wasn't like the Broncos were exploiting mismatches every single week. You know, we did see that at times in the 2-minute drive. It's like, man, Samaje Perine is an absolute hoss when it comes to the 2-minute drive, but it wasn't like that throughout the course of the rest of the game. We didn't see, schemed touches to the running backs that were, hey, this is a really effective piece of the offense that we could see every single week. It was more so dump offs after dump off after dump off and constant targets going to Javonte Williams out wide when it's like, why is he getting the ball? Why is Javonte getting the ball in space and not somebody else? You know what I'm saying? And it just felt like that uphill battle all year to get these guys involved at all costs. And that unfortunately cost the Broncos a lot of offensive efficiency. I mean, when you talk about those guys occupying such a huge percentage of the overall target share, man, that's really a shame in hindsight with guys like Jerry Jeudy being sacrificed at the expense.
Well, that was the frustrating thing, and I'm glad you brought that up because there were times, and I remember just sitting there in the press box and I'm pulling up NFL GSIS and I'm looking at, okay, who's got the most targets here? There were multiple games this season where Javonte or Samaje had more overall passing targets than Marvin Mims and Jerry Jeudy. To me, that was a huge issue. Cortland saw a lot of volume, a lot of targets because obviously he's the big body guy. But the fact that your running back saw more targets over a stretch of games than other guys that have prolific speed like a Marvin Mims, who if you just get downfield, you can set things up for him. Jerry Jeudy, who we know is a great route runner, can create separation. We saw it a little bit in those last couple of games here for the Broncos when they were able to throw the intermediate passing game and the like slant routes more consistently. But I mean, that's just it took you to week 18 to get those guys more targets. Like the running back position was, like you mentioned it great. It's a security blanket, but that's not how you're going to win games in the National Football League. You have to have balance. And Denver offensively, we all know this, they had no balance between the run and the pass this season in terms of who was getting targets and what the reasoning was for it. That I think has to change here going into 2024. And that leads to us maybe even emphasizing and talking about each of these players and even this position room specifically. What are some of the biggest questions surrounding Denver's running back room? And one of them being around Javonte Williams and his future with the team. We'll dive deeper into that here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move that I can make that'll take my business to the next level here in 2024? Well, LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team that you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire, Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses, they get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Make sure you achieve your business goals in 2024 with the right team member. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, it's quick, and it's easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at DoorDash. Did the game go to timeout? It's time to order in with DoorDash. It's a halftime. That's ordering time. If it's the 2-minute warning, you got it. That's your cue to order in. You can order pizza, wings, soda, burgers, or even just the buns on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Or you could kick back at kickoff with unbeatable deals on everything that you need for the watch party or the tailgate. And if you're in Denver, some of my local favorites that I have that I always go to, never go wrong with an illegal pizza burrito bowl or a double jam-packed protein burrito with chicken, with steak, with rice, and on top of that, a little bit of queso to go along with it. That's one of the things I usually get DoorDash directly to my doorstep. It's convenient, and it's something that helps me on game day. Get prepared before game day and stock up on your favorite appetizers and order all your tailgate gear on DoorDash. Then get ready to watch your team win. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Once again, get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and you enter code LOCKED23.
What is the outlook for the 2024 season for the Denver Broncos running back position? But maybe first we need to ask some questions about this position. I mean, who's actually going to make up this position? Is Sean Payton going to stick with a fullback? Is he going to stick with this kind of 3 running back committee? We're going to answer those questions. We're going to talk about it. We're going to discuss it on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, but want to say a huge thank you and shout out to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, wherever you listen to podcasts, or if you watch the show on YouTube. Cody and I are so appreciative that you make us part of your day, however you choose to do so, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Cody, I think before we get to kind of our maybe projections and outlook for 2024, which we are going to talk about, I think we have to ask some questions surrounding this position for I guess kind of this in between here. We're kind of evaluating 2023, looking ahead to 2024. Maybe the biggest question is, can Javonte Williams bounce back, right? Because like you mentioned earlier, it was a tough season for him. We know he was coming off injury, kind of a miraculous recovery process, and we were all kind of just like, how is he even practicing right now? So there's got to be a little grace period there, but at the same time, if a guy is leading your team in touches, you expect better efficiency than we got from Javonte in 2023.
And part of me is also wondering too, I think there was a combination between Javonte trying to get the confidence back. And look, I think for him, you mentioned it, like for him to be ready for day one of the start of training camp, we were all shocked. We were all surprised, but it was a nice surprise there to see Javonte back and to see him move the way that he was. And we saw that first action for him as well against the 49ers in the preseason. You got to go against a really good defense in his first game back from the injury, the major knee injury that had multiple ligaments reconstructed. And I agree, like there's got to be a grace period there, obviously, for him having the volume of touches. You want production. Was that more of an issue of, in your opinion, was it more of an issue of Javonte maybe not fully trusting it? I mean, at times watching him run, it didn't seem like he had issues trusting it, but there were times where, maybe he didn't see the hole, right? His vision wasn't as great this year, or he ran into the backs of a couple of his blockers. Like for me, I'm not going to hold 2023 strongly against Javonte for his 3.6 yards per carry and some of his struggles there, just because we know Denver's offense had a lot of struggles of their own. But for Javonte coming off that major knee injury, sometimes we do see, look how long it's taken for Courtland Sutton after the knee injury he had back in 2020 to kind of get back to, oh my gosh, like Courtland's playing at the best level of football. Wide receivers a little different because they're probably running a little bit more every single play than a running back necessarily is, and they get more snaps on the field than a guy like Javonte. So for me, I'm going to give Javonte some grace here, but I think it does lead to a bigger question, like can he bounce back? I don't think it's can he. I think will he? And I think he absolutely needs to have a bounce back year in 2024 because he's also facing a contract year as well.
He is, and that looms large. I mean, obviously the Broncos don't have to pick up any sort of option on his contract or anything like that, but at the same time, I mean, he could be you typically see running backs right now, if they play well enough in their 4th year of their deal, they're going to get the franchise tag because it's a palatable number for teams to pay. And it's like, we'd rather pay you the franchise tag as opposed to giving you, $30 million guaranteed. And I think with Javonte Williams, you're looking at that situation. You play well in 2024, you're probably getting slapped with the franchise tag. That's still a good chunk of change. But for him, it was the yards after the contact, the thing that made him so special in 2021 as a rookie, where he's getting nominated for angry runs week after week, and where he looked like he could be that Nick Chubb type that the Broncos envisioned when he was coming out of North Carolina. That was non-existent in 2023. And that was maybe the one area of his game where you could say, this is what sets Javonte apart. I mean, he may not always have the best vision. He may run into some offensive linemen, or he may run straight at some defenders at times, but man, he's most likely going to bowl one of them over, right? And you expected that from him because that's the type of player that he is, creating yardage after contact. And we did not see that in 2023. Now, to paint the picture, Cody, of exactly what that looks like, I think we have to look at the numbers, because Javonte was extremely efficient at creating yards after the contact in his rookie season. In terms of total yardage after contact in 2021, he had 460 yards after contact playing in 17 games, right? In 16 games in 2023, 355 yards after contact. So we're talking about a difference of 2.3 yards after contact per rushing attempt and 31 broken tackles in his rookie year, to 1.6 yards after contact per attempt and only 10 broken tackles in 2023. That is a stark contrast. That's two different players essentially. And the Broncos drafted 2021 guy. They did not, the guy that they got in 2023 is not what they're expecting. So if they're fine with this grace period for Javonte, I think he'll be back and in his same role in 2024, expecting him to progress after that injury.
I'd be very curious as well to compare. And look, I know Saquon's an entirely different player, but like, what was it like for Saquon in his year back after coming off the ACL? I know he had his struggles, but there's also that offense down there in New York that wasn't so balanced either. So, how much I think they both can factor into it in terms of production. So I'll be very curious to see for Javonte. I have a belief that he'll bounce back. I just know that this is a guy who, man, he's such a hard worker, and he's one of the best guys I think you could be around inside the locker room. And this is a guy who understands just, keeping his head down and just grinding. And like, that's what I appreciate about Javonte. Like, he's just a guy that understands, like, hey, I know I got to do this, and he's going to find a way to do it. He attacked his rehab in that manner. And I think he'll attack this offseason trying to be the best version of himself to get back to who he was in his first couple of seasons in the league. Now, I think another question is, could Jaleel McLaughlin be in line for an elevated role? This is something that Sean Payton hinted to us toward the end of the season that, like, we have conversations. He's the first guy in the building. And this was dating all the way back to rookie minicamp and OTAs and training camp. But you saw with Jaleel, like, he's got ridiculous speed. And there was even a hint there that, okay, well, maybe if Sean Payton doesn't put all his plans to make Greg Dulcich the Joker, maybe you have a plan where it's like, okay, even if Dulcich can't be the Joker, Jaleel can. I'm very, very curious to see if he'll have an expanded role here this upcoming season.
Right, because he got 107 touches in 2023, and you expect that to potentially rise in 2024, but he needs to maintain efficiency along with the increase in touches. So if he gets upwards of 120, 150 touches, can you maintain that level of efficiency and effectiveness? I mean, Sean Payton also went on record as saying, like, man, this guy does such a good job of avoiding getting hit hard. And then I think it was, unfortunately, the very next game, he gets a concussion after getting hit really hard. So that is the one risk factor there with a smaller running back like this, whose game is predicated on speed. He has to be able to avoid that really hard contact in order to be a longer term asset to the Denver Broncos offense. And we know Sean Payton did some great stuff with Darren Sproles. He was a featured piece for them with the Saints. So maybe that's something that, hey, Sean Payton's going to look at Jaleel McLaughlin and say, you want a bigger role in this offense? Watch the guy who did what you are capable of doing the best in my offense. So that's what we want you to do. So I think Jaleel McLaughlin, Cody, on his iPad all offseason, he's hopefully got a steady diet of Darren Sproles' New Orleans Saints tape.
Well, and on top of that, too, I think maybe part of me wonders if the team asks him or if they're going to ask him to maybe put on 5 to 10 pounds of muscle. I mean, that's certainly possible. It's doable. It's attainable at this point. So, I mean, I'm very curious to see if that's going to be in it. But I think maybe another question, and we'll kind of leave it at this, is will we see the Broncos finally embrace a true committee approach here? And what I mean by that is using three guys consistently, right? We talked about earlier, like Denver used three backs all season long, but they went with one guy as the primary. And then the second guy really was kind of switching in between the beginning of the season, the middle of the season, and then the end of the season. Can Denver commit to using truly three running backs, almost in a way that I think the New England Patriots have kind of excelled in the last few seasons? I know they were, bummed not having Ramondre Stevenson for a good portion of this year due to an ankle injury, but you look at, I think, where teams are at, and you look at the Baltimore Ravens, a great example of really using a true committee approach. If you want to factor Lamar and his legs into that, Justice Hill, you look at other guys that they've had in the mix. Well, now obviously Dalvin Cook being thrown in there. They do have a true committee approach at the running back position. Will that help Denver's offense? I think is another question that we'll have to ask and maybe see what goes on this offseason. But Broncos country, one thing we are going to dive deep into here on today's episode of a show. What is the running back outlook for this team here in 2024? Will there be changes to the position group? Well, you're going to get that on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks, and Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right. With Prize Picks, they're the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling against thousands of other players, including the pros and the sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and then you watch the winnings roll in. Testing my skills on Prize Picks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And if you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries, they stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. And on top of that, quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So make sure you check it out. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, we just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. Special shout out to all the everydayers out there. You all make Locked On Broncos exactly what it is. Thank you so much for making the show a community for other members in Broncos country, other fans, and the commentary that we get. I mean, you have built a true community here. We're so grateful for you. Thank you so much, Broncos country there. I think we have to answer these questions here. What is the outlook for the running back position here in 2024? And I think really, Sayre, the biggest question here that I want to throw out there, and Broncos country, we want to hear from you as you hear about this and we prompt you here. Sayre, I want to hear your response here. Is the Broncos running back position room right now, as is it good enough to run it back with the same three guys in 2024?
Boy, that is a tough question, isn't it? Because of course you expect, or when you're predicting and projecting going forward, the most recent thing we have to go off of is the 2023 season. We just got done talking about how it wasn't good enough, and the offensive line, by most metrics, Cody, seemed to be much better for the Denver Broncos, especially when it comes to run blocking and pass protecting as well. But run blocking, especially, you feel like they upgraded there. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, do you bring in a challenger somehow? Do you bring in a fourth guy into the mix who you could effectively say, hey, this guy could push any one of you off the roster? Is that a move like an Alvin Kamara, if you do some sort of sign and trade and get him under a reasonable contract or something like that? I don't know what that looks like. I mean, the free agent market at the running back position this offseason is bonkers. I mean, when we're talking about free agency in general and wave one of free agency this year, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what that even really means. Because, Cody, if you look up and down this year's list of free agents, it is a loaded free agent class. I mean, it's chock full at every position group, top to bottom, really good players, but running back in particular. I mean, we're talking about guys like Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, all these other players around, DeAndre Swift from around the league, who, I mean, they could make or break your offseason potentially by being your top running back and being a guy that takes up a huge target share, for your overall offensive output. So I see the Broncos going into this offseason with a very open mind and saying, if we could get we know what Sean Payton thinks of Josh Jacobs, right? I mean, he said so much at last year's Radio Row at the Super Bowl. And so we know Josh Jacobs is somebody that Sean Payton really likes. I'm sure he likes Saquon Barkley. I'm sure he likes a lot of these other guys. I don't think that they'll stay with status quo. I think they're going to bring somebody in to push this group. And I think they'll either keep 4, or I think they will potentially push somebody like Javonte or Samaje off the roster.
That'll be a very interesting thing. And I'm glad you brought up what he said about Josh Jacobs, because that was what I was thinking, because I was watching that interview in person live at Radio Row. He was on the Pat McAfee show, and Josh Jacobs was sitting there. And we were kind of saying like, oh, is he maybe alluding to something here? He's like, oh, this guy's a really terrific player. We'll see about him. But part of me is also wondering as well. We've heard George Payton and the Broncos say, hey, we are not going to be very active in the first wave of free agency. And I also think it's a situation too, when you look at how running back contracts are now like viewed, and look, it's a very controversial thing still. Like, even though Saquon and Josh Jacobs, they had some addendums put into their contract to make it doable for 2023 for them in order to play, because we thought, okay, they're going to hold out. Jacobs going to hold out. Saquon's going to hold out. Austin Eckler's going to hold out. Like, we saw all these different things happen here at the beginning part of training camp. But then they made the addendums. The guys reported they came back. Josh Jacobs dealt with some injuries last year, was not able to play in that last game. They obviously had viewed Zamir White very, very well, and obviously he had a very big game against the Broncos in the season finale. But part of me does wonder, if Denver does get a running back here, Sayre, what is that going to look like from a contract valuation standpoint, considering where things are at? I mean, remember at the time, too, when the Broncos signed Melvin Gordon in free agency, his contract was a very, very big eyesore in the eyes of the fan base. But I think overall, when you look at how running backs are paid now and the production you ask of them, is that really a position that's worth spending on? I think if there's an upgrade, and I think that Saquon, I think a guy like obviously Josh Jacobs, I think those guys would be instant upgrades to Denver's running back room by far, like not even close. And I think you can complement those guys really well with what Javonte does. And maybe a guy like Jaleel. I think it would push a guy like Samaje potentially out of the realm here in Denver. I'm curious about that, though. That's an interesting dynamic. I don't think many people floated out here this offseason, because we've been so focused on, and rightfully so, Denver's top priority is quarterback. But, it helps maybe even a rookie quarterback, if that's the path that Denver goes, having a dang good run game and having guys that you can lean on. That's where I think you can have balance here going forward, which I think you look at the opposite of it. I think what CJ Stroud was able to do without really a good run game, I think is even more impressive, considering all the circumstances as well. So, I mean, there's no like true formula here. I think it just depends on your scheme. And also maybe Denver's run scheme could change.
It could, Cody. It very well could. And I think that that's going to be something to watch, especially as we get through the course of the offseason. Like, where do they go in this direction? And what does change? What is Sean Payton, after he's evaluated the roster, he's evaluated the coaching staff, where does he ultimately land? And I think you bring up a great point about the rookie quarterback. That's the one situation where I think you maybe afford yourself the luxury, quote unquote, of going after a running back in free agency. And there's no guarantee of who's all going to be available. We could see other guys get franchise tag. They could re-sign in certain places. And maybe the market for running backs is going to be bigger than we think or expect because of what Jonathan Taylor got paid by the Indianapolis Colts. So that's certainly a possibility. But if the budget allows, I think that there's going to be a situation where this gets prioritized by the Broncos, whether it's somebody like a Kamara, if the Saints are willing to dump him, or is it like, does the Packers keep Aaron Jones? I mean, he's got a cap hit of nearly $18 million in 2024, his contract year as well. So there's just question marks all around the league. This free agent pool is going to be deep, and the market could really be more team friendly than expected.
Aaron Jones could be a very good Alvin Kamara-like player on Sean Payton's offense. You mentioned that, and I saw it. Just watching him in the postseason as well, like watching him when he was held. And this is a guy who's dealing with injuries all throughout this season. Like, his first game back was against the Broncos, and Denver kind of held him in check a little bit. But man, you really started to see him turn it on once he got fully healthy down the stretch. And obviously for them to make the playoff push that they did, have a chance to beat the 49ers in the divisional round, they were there. Jones would be a very, very intriguing option. And look, Broncos country, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Denver's running back position, the overall outlook, reviewing 2023? Do you believe that they should run it back with the same exact running back room here this upcoming season in 2024? What are your options? We want to hear from you. Make sure you comment down below in the YouTube comment section, or if you're on social media, you want to interact with us at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. But Broncos country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. The next installment of this review series we're going to be taking a look at, we'll be looking at the wide receiver position here for the Broncos. The group could return in full here in 2024. It could require some restructures to a contract. Could Denver maximize their value with the playmakers that they have? That's going to be a question we'll answer on the next episode. Locked On Broncos.